Presidential campaigning reaches the edges of Kansas and attracts more than 1,000 people. Plus, a heat wave on top of recent flooding is bad news for Kansas drivers. And the state's economy is rolling in the money, from politics to hemp. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. The state got another boost to the economy from the great hemp experiment this week, one that will mean hundreds of jobs and hopefully for years. KSN's Craig Andrus was there for the big celebration.
Yeah, do-overs.
Or not. Presidential campaigning reaches the edges of Kansas and attracts more than 1,000 people. Plus, a heat wave on top of recent flooding is bad news for Kansas drivers. And the state's economy is rolling in the money, from politics to hemp. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. The state got another boost to the economy from the great hemp experiment this week, one that will hopefully mean hundreds of jobs and stick around for a few more years. KSN's Craig Andrus was there for the celebration.
The engineering firm Mechanized Concepts is here in Russell for the hemp industry. They say they chose this spot because of the Russell Economic Development Team, a team that got behind the idea years ago. They also say they've got a lot of confidence in Kansas farmers. Music and a ribbon cutting, complete with Kansas Governor Laura Kelly on hand. This crowd welcomed the hemp industry to town, something the governor says took a lot of research and talk out of Topeka. And with the hemp growing already happening, this is the next step.
I'm glad we've got the research going on now. We'll have the hemp development going on, and now we'll have a place to actually take it to market.
Governor Kelly says it'll be good for Kansas agriculture and called it a part of the future of farming. The company itself will sell harvesting equipment, and they will also offer expertise to Kansas growers to get this crop in the ground and eventually into the marketplace. They expect the industry to heat up quickly.
In the beginning, 1 is 2 and 2 is 4 and 4 is 8, but it can become 16, 32, 64 really quickly.
Grover says another reason they picked Kansas is because that state law, it changed. It now allows some farmers to begin growing hemp. Economic developers in Russell say it's been a long process.
We've been working on industrial hemp for 6 years, in between working on the industrial hemp bill, but also working with different markets and different businesses that would help cultivate hemp in Kansas.
They say while it helps, there's a test program for hemp growing in Kansas right now. There will be a crop to take to the marketplace. The company says it will build out facilities in Russell starting immediately. So the company will set up shop here on the east side of Russell. They will have probably 25 employees by the end of the year. In a couple of years, a couple hundred. The eventual goal, up to 900. In Russell, Craig Andrus, KSN News 3.
And joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have State Representative Tom Sawyer, Democrat from Wichita, State Representative Stephen Johnson, Republican from Assyria. I always have to question my pronunciation of that one. And Bob Weeks with Voice of Liberty. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So talking about the hemp, I mean, last week we talked about all of the farmers, an incredible number really wanting to get in on this. And I know, Stephen, that you are on the committee that approves these licenses. That's just really been an explosion.
There's been some great energy, and as Janae mentioned, from Russell for several years, and that group really was behind it in 2014 when there wasn't a lot of energy. But it has come together. It's exciting to see what they have there. The dollars will follow, and as I think Ms. Grover said, right now it's largely the investment dollars that are going in, but excited to see what comes out. In Russell, they are not only looking at processing the fiber, that is the one fiber processing facility that we have set up for the state of the licenses. We have several on the CBD oil. We have one for grain that's in Cloud County. But there are some really interesting pockets. Reno County has a lot of things organized from planting through processing. Johnson County has a lot organized on that as well. So it will be fun to watch a few of those to see how we figure out not only how to grow it, but how we really figure out the need that it meets. The other exciting thing in Russell is they're working on some machinery and inputs that will go into the crop as well that could be huge both for farming, but huge for the Kansas economy.
And talking about the Kansas economy, usually when we're talking about hundreds of jobs coming someplace like Wichita, Lawrence, Johnson County, that sort of thing. But even in Russell County, in Russell, perhaps even a bigger impact there than here.
Oh yeah, 900 jobs is huge in an area like Russell, Kansas. I think this is exciting, as it's been years in the making. Hemp, industrial hemp requires a lot less water to grow, so I think it can be a crop for the future for our farmers. So we need to. It's a great future kind of industry, future growth, and it's exciting to see it get started finally.
Bob, as you're digging into this, what are you seeing?
Well, I think it's just amazing how versatile the crop is. I think this company, it seems like building products are their primary output. I do worry that the promoters of this have said this is going to save Kansas, and I'm sure it's going to be good. Farmers will have more choices that they can figure out what to do with their land and machinery and everything. So hopefully it'll be good, but I don't think it's going to fund schools another 50%, is it? No.
Well, certainly those who have been working on the crop this year has not gone as well as they had hoped with all the weather we've had.
And now it's even hard to remember, what was all the controversy about bringing this into Kansas? I hope we've gotten beyond that.
Yeah.
It certainly sounds like we have at this point.
Gotten past a lot. One challenge this year has been planting anything. So our acres actually planted are down. We may not learn all that we would have in a more normal year to get started, but it'll be exciting for that. And the jobs piece, it's not without risk. As you say, this isn't the saving grace for everything. The harvesting machinery that they're looking at creating, that could be huge. It could be bigger than that, but it's also a risk. And will that take off? Will that be the way that we go moving forward? But excited to see that people are taking that risk and moving us that direction.
Well, and we were talking about the economy and things going well. CNBC recently, national headlines for the state of Kansas about how much of a turnaround we've seen in the state economy.
Oh yeah, that was exciting. That article is very exciting. It said Kansas had the #1 gain. We went from 35th best business climate to 19th best business climate. So that's a pretty big jump in a short amount of time. So we'll see how that sustains itself, but that is a good movement and a good sign for the state of Kansas.
All right.
And not necessarily a point in time, but certainly it's measured each year, but they had a number of things to look at that had, I think, been happening for a couple of years that they were able to get a good measure on this year and have more confidence in our investment in infrastructure and other things to place us at 19th in the business climate.
Well, and I know certainly keeping those things rolling is one of the things that both of you working with the budget committees and the tax committees are concentrating on. Something that might help out from what we're hearing, the 2020 elections. It could be another big boost for the state economy as long as the race to replace retiring Senator Pat Roberts remains competitive with a crowded field of candidates. I explained all about it in this report I filed with Cake News.
I am announcing my candidacy for the United States Senate.
More than a year out from election night 2020, and there are already 3 Republican candidates for U.S. Senate: Chris Kobach, Dave Lindstrom, and Jake LaTurner, with at least 2 more expected to join the race. And then there are the Democrats. Already 2 candidates there have thrown their hats in the ring: former U.S. Representative Nancy Boyda and former U.S. Attorney Barry Grissom.
In theory, the more candidates, the more potential options to find someone who cares about what you care about.
At this point, most Kansans aren't paying much attention to the race, and it will take cash to start changing that. From paying campaign workers to feeding them. There's the gas to travel across the state and, of course, the ads.
In Kansas, our values run deep.
In 2014, Senator Pat Roberts and his main opponent, Greg Orman, combined to spend more than $13.8 million in Kansas. That's before the millions PACs spent on their own ads. Generally, the more competitive a race, the higher the total climbs.
That means more money for Kansas. So obviously the things that we're going to need in Kansas, that's going to bring more money to it.
It's going to be pretty huge. And, there's some things that I can see in the state that, we might need that extra money.
But in the end, political analysts say it comes down to which candidates are running, both here and in other states.
A lot of television stations in Kansas thought Kobach was going to make them a lot of money last fall, but it turns out that the national election was so much more interesting that there wasn't as much Kobach-related advertising.
And that is one reason why a lot of folks are kind of looking at Kobach's entrance to the Senate race, like him or hate him, as something that could bring more money into Kansas, because a lot of folks expect that if he wins the primary, which analysts say, Neil Allen, he was on the show last week saying he has a pretty good chance of winning the primary at this point, that you could see the national parties, Republican and Democrat both, putting a lot more money into Kansas because this race suddenly becomes up there, up in the air.
You know, it is exciting. It's exciting to see that we actually have some Democratic candidates for U.S. Senate. You know, the last time we elected a Democrat for the U.S. Senate from Kansas was 1932. So, I mean, it doesn't happen very much. And we never get national attention. So it would be interesting to see if we actually do get national attention this time. But, you know, good competitive races are great. I think they're great for the people of Kansas. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. And we'll see if that happens this time.
Yeah. And having a good set of choices are great. Are you thinking of announcing as well?
No.
2 or 3 people who haven't yet. Or something. Anyway, but the spending piece will have an impact in pockets. That's hard to know how much actually comes into Kansas with some of those monies that may be spent on printers and folks and consultants that are out of state. But certainly a lot of activity, and certainly if it is in play for which party would control, that will attract a lot more attention to the state. Much of it positive, not all of it, but if the ads can help to convey useful information, then we've got a win-win.
Yeah.
That's a big if.
Yeah, I was going to say, that may be off in Never Never Land there.
You know, I have some family in Iowa, and I've been up in Iowa on the run-up to the presidential caucus a few times, and I mean, all the advertisements on TV are from political candidates. I'm wondering if you're like an auto dealer or somebody who depends on television advertising to drive in your business, you can't get your ads on TV hardly.
Oh, they find ways.
Okay.
I cut my teeth covering politics in Iowa, and looking at the political ads there, the TV stations, oh yeah, they depend on those ads every other year. But in the other year, that's when the local companies come in and say, okay, now it's our turn. So they find their ways. But as we look at this, as you're looking at a competitive race, I mean, some of the other names that we're hearing, Roger Marshall, Susan Wagle, some of those others, folks who've been around Kansas for a while who have some clout, it could be a really very interesting race.
Well, and the big unknown is Mike Pompeo.
Yeah.
He, because of his current job, I believe if he were to declare I'm a candidate, then he'd have to step down as Secretary of State right away. I just don't think you can do both things at the same time. So,
No.
you know, it may be till after Christmas or something before we're sure of his intention.
No.
And, you know, people say that he would be the odds-on favorite, but I'm, you know, not so sure about that. He's popular amongst Republicans, but so are Chris Kobach and some of the others, too.
Yeah, in fact, there are those who say that he and Kobach share a big percentage of the same constituency. And so if you put both of them in there, they kind of split that constituency, and suddenly it's even more of a wide open race.
That's possible. And on the Democratic side, you know, Barry Grissom, former U.S. attorney. We've got Nancy Boyd, a former U.S. Congresswoman. Barbara Boyer is looking at it, state senator from Johnson County. So
Yeah.
it's great to see an interest on our side as well.
Yeah, to actually have a competitive primary.
Yeah, very unusual.
I was going to say, I think that's the first one I remember since I've been in Kansas.
You know, there are many years we haven't really even had one candidate for
Yeah.
U.S. Senate. So, yeah.
And with, I mean, experienced candidates who have experience in government and elections as well. So that might take some of the heat off the Republicans, because, you know, the governor's primary last year was pretty tough on Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, friendships are still in fray a little bit from some of the stuff that went on.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a very interesting year and a half till all of this gets resolved. We'll just have to keep watching it. Meanwhile, moving on, the state's going to need all of this money we've been talking about to help fix some of the damage this year's weather has done to our infrastructure, especially state roads. KSN's Crystal Sherrill explains what's happening.
Oh my gosh, what in the world was that?
Shara McMahon was driving down South Broadway on Monday when she drove over this.
I didn't even see the bump in the road. I just saw that there was a police car there with lights on, so of course you avoid it. And so I went over the bump and kind of lost my breath. I mean, it was pretty big. I had no idea it was even there.
She's had to refill her tire with air since then, but she's not the only driver experiencing issues. Several drivers say they too have noticed damages to their cars. One woman says her rim was bent and her tire went flat.
I've hit a pothole before, and that was worse than a pothole.
Officials say something similar happened in Hayes, but that the heat is to blame for both incidents.
And I felt it go thump, and I was in the office building here, and it shook the building.
City officials have smoothed out the buckle on Broadway to avoid further damage to cars and poured new concrete after taking out 2 lanes of pavement. Asbury says he's seen it before and predicts it won't be the last.
With all the rain we've had, there's a lot of water under the roadways, and that causes them to pop up too. The water gets hot underneath the roadway, and that causes part of the pressure that causes it to pop up.
Okay, anybody else just feel like we can't win this year? First we had the flooding, now we've got the heat, and they're all taking out our roads.
You know, there could be some good news. You know, in Wichita this week, we just got the electric scooters, and you put those together with these buckled roads, and that's either excitement or danger, depending on your attitude.
Well, legally, you are supposed to ride on the roads on those scooters, so if you're on the sidewalks, get a ticket, take the roads. You might have to make a few jumps off the buckling.
You know, there was last month in Wichita the budget simulation that was tried to gauge people's attitudes on what they think is important to spend on. And the first 4 had to do with police and fire, public safety, but number 5 was maintaining the roads. And I think that's always an issue that, you know, it's easy to complain about those being Republican, Democrat, whoever you are. So.
Yeah, it definitely does seem like people are starting to be a little bit more concerned about roads statewide than they have been. You know, the standard mantra is we're not Missouri, we're not Oklahoma, we've got pretty good roads, but it's been a few years and there has been some concern about the maintenance of them.
Well, and you know, for several years in a row, we were taking huge chunks of money out of State Department of Transportation, about $300 million a year. So we're finally starting to get back to letting them spend the full amount they're supposed to spend. So maybe just in time, hopefully, we can help take care of some of these problems.
And some of those dollars do go to the local transportation budgets as well.
Wow. So have you guys been hearing from constituents about roads at this point, or?
You know, not more than usual, but have heard for a few years now. I mean, people started noticing, you know, it used to be roads that were pretty good. All of a sudden, people are saying, hey, you know, the turnpike even isn't what it used to be. So starting to hear some of that.
Wow. What about you, Stephen?
Well, the roads in our area are a little different as we dealt with it. A lot of our county roads were really affected. We're not used to multiple 6-inch rain events. And it was surprising the degree of washing that happened even in what I would consider the hills. You sometimes expect it in a lower area where everything comes together, but 6 inches of rain just off of one point moves a lot of rock and a lot of dirt and a lot of washouts. So that's been a challenge. Just the little farm roads that we maintain on our own, major changes to go in and try and rebuild that just to get through, and a lot of erosion.
Yeah, based on some tweets that you sent out earlier this week, it sounds like the rivers and creeks are trying to carve out their own roads at this point.
They certainly did, and that's been a huge challenge all along. The Corps of Engineers has been working and struggling to figure out how and what release schedules to have, not only for our immediate situation with the banks, but downstream and how much the streams are able to handle. And it has just been very difficult with that volume of water and the consistent volume of water. There are acres of dirt that will be washed downstream from multiple locations in each bend that it comes up against a sandbank.
No, and certainly not the only one we're hearing that from, just perhaps the most public, at least to this point. I have to ask though, on a side note, have you seen a lot of frogs up in this area?
Oh my goodness, yes, everywhere. They are everywhere. Sometimes the grass is just kind of moving as you walk through, and and I just hope it's frogs.
Yeah, frogs or toads, I'm not sure. I know in Mays we've seen a lot of toads with all this, but all right. So weather's not going to go away. We got to keep dealing with it one way or another, I guess. We just got to fix the damage it does. All right. Well, Kansas issues could soon influence lives across the country. The United States Supreme Court will hear arguments in 3 cases involving the state of Kansas this fall. Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt announced this week that 3 Kansas cases are on the Supreme Court schedule or docket for this October. This is the first time in state history the nation's highest court has heard 3 Kansas cases at one time. The first case is an appeal in the capital murder conviction of James Craig Collar, who killed 4 relatives in Burlingame in November of 2009. Collar argues Kansas law unconstitutionally prevented him from using an insanity defense. The second case involves an identity theft out of Johnson County. The question before the Supreme Court will be whether the state of Kansas can use information from federal tax and employment documents to prosecute state-level crimes. The third case discusses a traffic stop in Douglas County. In that case, a law enforcement officer ran a registration check on a pickup, discovered the owner had a revoked license, and pulled the vehicle over. It turned out the owner was driving. The question the court will decide is whether it's reasonable for an officer to suspect the owner of a vehicle is the one driving it. Did the officer have probable cause? The Kansas Supreme Court overturned convictions in both the second and third cases, and the state is appealing. So this is kind of a first, certainly, well, we know it's a first, that's what the Attorney General said, but I only think of like 3 or 4 cases in my entire time in Kansas that have made the Supreme Court, and now we've got 3 at once. Does that?
So it's probably kind of a collision of a few things,
Yeah.
where I don't know that these are the 3 most important cases that we would have had from Kansas necessarily. But apparently they touch on issues that we're dealing with nationally, and due to that there was an effort to deal with what are the search and seizure issues related to the traffic stop, what are the laws related to the use, exactly, using those federal papers versus or federal forms versus the state. A death penalty always can create a lot of interest to try and come up with should that insanity plea be there. But so I'm guessing there's just a fair amount of cases similar to those where these were good samples for them to be able to pull, to be able to go a little deeper.
Yeah, and immigration, of course, is one of the most contentious issues going on right now. And these do seem to be kind of obscure points of law that you can lie on one federal form, but they can't, if you lie in the same way on another form, they can't. See, I can't even explain what it is.
Well, you notice I kind of avoided that whole aspect in the brief review I gave there.
And similarly, is it, if I am pulled over because my vehicle is registered to me and I have, what do I do to allow law enforcement to do their job while still, and again, I don't know enough details of the case to try and pass judgment on that, but
well, I think that's important because in Wichita a few months ago, the unfortunate crash in downtown Wichita, that started because a license plate scanner in a police car scanned a license that led them to believe the driver was on parole violation or stolen or something, and that's what initiated the chase, which led to several deaths, unfortunately.
Things that we think of as very obscure, but could have a pretty big impact.
And they could, and I said they could have national impacts. So I guess that's, but it is. I think it's just a case of where, as Representative Johnson said, just kind of right time, right place. These issues just kind of came up at this time. It's a little unusual. I said it's very unusual. First time I've ever had 3, but it just, I think, and there are cases, but you know, just the way it falls, I think, I guess.
And there could be more coming up soon because the Kansas Supreme Court's ruling on abortion is now being applied to a lot of other areas, like the people who have been sentenced to death in Kansas, are those sentences legal now? And that's probably a Supreme Court issue too.
Yeah. That's one everybody will be watching very closely, I think. So, yeah. Well, we do have one more thing to talk about tonight. Presidential politics almost came to Kansas this week, or close enough for government work, as some might say. Pete Budaj visited Kansas City for a fundraiser and to learn about how one community is helping veterans live better lives. Pete Budaj, or Mayor Pete, as his followers affectionately call him, was in Kansas City this week. He began with a couple of fundraisers Tuesday night, a private one at a supporter's home, followed by a public fundraising rally, which drew hundreds, including some Wichtons. He told the crowd he has a plan to bring Americans together in these divided times.
And we need to unite around our values, even across different walks of life. And we need to have shared experiences as a country. We need to have the kind of shared experiences that I had when I was in the military without having to go to war in order to get them. And that's why I believe this country would be well served to create 1 million national civilian service opportunities by the time.
The next morning, he visited the Veterans Community Project in Kansas City, a tiny house village for homeless veterans. Budaj, a veteran himself, said the project has cracked the code on what it takes to connect veterans with much-needed resources and promised he would be talking about it around the country. Now, I've got to say, as somebody who's covered politics for years and who came out of Iowa to Kansas, I'm excited to see presidential candidates coming this close to us. You get a different view of a candidate when you get to see them in person than when all you see is the ads and the TV stories. As much as we try to give you a feel in our newscasts, it's not the same as meeting someone in person.
Yeah, I know it is exciting. I'm glad Kansas is getting a little bit of attention. With all these candidates, hopefully we'll get more. And I'm impressed at the turnout he had. Obviously, Mayor Pete is building some excitement. But it is exciting. I remember back in 1980, when I was a college student, with Ronald Reagan came to Wichita and Ted Kennedy came to Wichita. You know, so when anytime these presidential candidates come, they do bring a certain amount of excitement, and it's exciting because a state like Kansas, we don't get that much attention.
Yeah,
Yeah, and in recent years, the field for president has been so large, which is great, as rough as we are on whoever's in the job, that people still want the job. So, but maybe to differentiate yourself, trying to step out and engage more places and get to places where you can catch a headline outside of your own tweets, et cetera, is a useful way to try and break out of the pack.
Well, we had a pretty exciting, politically, Republican presidential selection just 3 years ago. I mean, Donald Trump was here in Wichita right at caucus time. I'm not a Democrat, so I won't be participating in their primary or caucus next year, but I'm really pleased to see that the Democrats in Kansas have chosen ranked choice voting as a way to conduct this election. And that's something I feel very strongly we need all the time. But here, when you're likely, I imagine by the time the Democratic caucus, there's going to be quite a few dropouts. But there's still going to be probably going to be quite a few candidates left in the race. And the ranked choice voting, I think, will let people really choose who they want to be president rather than trying to do the things that I'm always told, if you vote for a libertarian, Bob, you're just voting for Hillary, you're throwing your vote away. Ranked choice voting lets you really express confidently your first choice without feeling your vote's being wasted.
Yeah, and that is something that we perhaps is the wave of the future. We've got a couple of states that have gone to that at the state level. Here in Kansas, we're seeing that in the Democratic primary. Maybe if it works there, who knows? Maybe we could see it advance beyond. I agree with you, Bob. I'm a huge fan of ranked choice voting. I think it does increase the impact of democracy.
It's exciting to see it happen. We'll see how it works. I know Maine has been doing it on a statewide basis, but it'll be interesting to see how it works in Kansas.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave that as the last word because we are out of time. Tom, Stephen, Bob, thank you all so much for joining me. I've appreciated our conversation. And we'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion as well. We'd love to continue it online. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or KPTS Channel 8 on Facebook and Twitter. For now, have a great week.